Welcome back, America. This has been a very important discussion about the future of our energy security. As we say often, energy security is national security. Energy security is economic security. We're lucky now to be joined by one of the great minds in the emerging energy space. He also happens to be part of the great ClearPath team that is making this conversation possible right now. Rich Powell serves as Chief Executive Officer of ClearPath, and he's our proud sponsor, as I mentioned. Rich, welcome back to the show here today.
Thanks so much for having me, John.
Rich, you have done some extraordinary recent research, and I think a lot of people remember after the Japanese nuclear accident, the public really frowned on nuclear energy. A decade later, nuclear energy is rising up the chart as the perfect solution for a low carbon, actually zero carbon, highly reliable energy source. Tell us what your new poll found.
So, in short, public opinion for nuclear is back in a big way. So a massive global effort, 13,000 respondents across 8 countries have found that, it's really pops the bubble that nuclear is unpopular. There are 5 supporters of nuclear energy, especially new nuclear, advanced technologies, for every 1 detractor. And support is particularly popular amongst maybe the least likely folks, environmentalists and young people. So across the board, it seems like public support for the future of nuclear energy is really bright.
Yeah, and that is a big change, and it's probably driving a revival of the discussion in the political circles. It seems to me in the last year to 18 months, there have been more policy discussions in Washington and state houses about really viable nuclear options than there were maybe for 4 or 5 years before that. Is the polling and the public sentiments driving a good common sense discussion now among policymakers?
We think so. It's a combination of obviously increasing public support, increasing concern about emissions and finding clean energy sources for the future. And frankly, in the midst of this global energy crisis, concern about energy independence and energy security and energy reliability. Nuclear is one of those few things that you can definitively say is clean and secure, drives our energy independence, is reliable. It operates 24/7, 365 through all kinds of weather. It's abundant. It's effectively a limitless source of energy, and it's affordable. It's really one of the most affordable ways, especially to power a low carbon energy system. So all of those things together really have policymakers taking a renewed look at this, and at all levels, domestically, nationally, down at the state level, and even exports and internationally.
There's a fascinating dynamic going on in the private sector. We think of nuclear power plants, and most of that is in the public sector and with regulators in the states and in the federal level. But now many private companies, big private companies like those who have to run future data centers are getting into the game. Big announcement recently with Dow. Tell us why that made the ground shake in the energy space.
So Dow Chemical, the largest producer of chemicals in the country, one of the largest consumers of chemicals in the country, has committed environmentally to taking all the emissions out of their production. They're in the industrial space. This is one of the hardest places in the country to do this. And they've seen nuclear as a way to produce both clean electricity for them and clean heat for them. It takes a lot of heat to make all the chemicals that Dow makes. So literally just this morning, they announced that they'd selected the site for the first chemical plant that's going to host an advanced nuclear reactor, something called a high temperature gas reactor. It can get really hot. So that'll be the Seadrift plant down in Texas. They'll be developing an X-energy high temperature gas reactor down there in partnership with the U.S. Department of Energy. So, public policy and national policy is playing a part in allowing this future to happen.
That is huge, and it's going to have a long tail of impact as other companies look at doing something similar, particularly energy-intensive industries. This could be a really big model for them. A few weeks ago, I had a chance to talk to one of the top Polish diplomats in the country. The Polish president was here just recently. Poland going to be one of the first major recipients of nuclear exports from the United States in a long time. It's been a long time since we were exporting a lot of this. Tell us why that's another big sign of the nuclear revival in our country.
So Poland's right at the intersection of all of these issues. They've got some of the worst air quality in Europe, and they're really trying to find ways to reduce their emissions just to clean up their air quality and, of course, to reduce their carbon and greenhouse gas emissions in the long term. And, they're right at the front lines of this land war in Europe. They're absorbing all of these Ukrainian refugees. They absolutely want to be beholden in no way to Russian gas or Russian coal, and they were consuming a lot of both until relatively recently. They're now proudly off of fossil fuels from Russia, but their domestic coal supplies are low and down. And so they're really looking to turn to advanced future technologies to take that next generation, both for their electricity and then for all the industrial growth that they want to see happen in Poland. And so they were looking at global offerings, and I'm excited to say that an American company has won the day for a big part of that. So General Electric, one of our kind of nuclear champion companies here in the United States, is going to export 20 of its small modular reactors to one of these Polish utility companies that'll build them to power industrial sites and cities and data centers and all of these things. And they're doing that in partnership with the U.S. federal government. So they'll do that with the Export-Import Bank of the United States. They'll provide some financing. The Development Finance Corporation will provide some financing and some sovereign guarantees to the project of Poland. That's just a huge win for U.S. nuclear exports. Today, the global build of nuclear is unfortunately dominated by Russia and increasingly by China. And we really haven't had competitive offerings or competitive financing packages to back those offerings into the developing world. I think that's changed in a pretty serious way over the last month. And we're seeing numerous companies across Eastern Europe and across the whole rest of the world looking for the first time again at U.S. designs and at U.S. financing packages such that we could really take back the lead that we once had on this technology globally.
Yeah, it's such an opportunity, and it seems to be accelerating. I want to do just a little education lesson, because I think a lot of people think, well, man, we spent trillions of dollars on solar and wind the last decade, but really it's only 3 or 4% of our clean energy load right now. Tell us how much nuclear makes of a zero carbon energy source in America.
So nuclear remains by far the largest individual source of clean energy in the United States. And so it's about 50% of all our clean energy. Historically, it's far more than 50% of all the clean energy. We've recently seen a rise in renewables. We've always had hydropower, and of course, wind and solar have come along. These are all great technologies, but you have to think about nuclear as kind of the backbone of that, or the battleship of our fleet of clean energy resources. And that's true also around the rest of the world. It's really nuclear and hydropower that make up the bulk of the clean energy around the world. Wind and solar are coming on well, and that is a good thing. We need all of these things to succeed together. And of course, they all can really complement each other, right? The sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow, but uranium will produce clean electricity 24/7, 365. So you can imagine putting all these things together into a comprehensive mix. And then, of course, the great thing about the nuclear energy and the uranium is that we really control the supply chain, and we control the processing, and we control the technology behind it. Some of the other technologies we've really fallen behind, and so we're beholden on countries like China and obviously industries dominated by the Chinese Communist Party to export those things to the United States. That's particularly true of solar and parts of the battery supply chain today. We have much greater control over the nuclear supply chain. So I think it's a good and noble thing that we're trying to get better control over the solar value chain, but we've got it today over the nuclear value chain. And so we can really feel we're advancing American energy security and independence by pushing forward on nuclear today.
Yeah, the nuclear outlook has markedly improved for everyday citizens in America. It's improved in the policymakers space. It's improved in the private sector. So all these forces are lining up. Even internationally now, a market is emerging that we didn't see a few years ago. There seems to be a couple of roadblocks to rapid success. One of those is permitting. Tell us what we need to do to fix the permitting process so we don't have to wait 10 or 12 years like Vogtle did to get fully online.
Yeah, well, so there's all kinds of issues in the permitting process, which we've discussed many times on this program, I'm sorry to say. In nuclear in particular, we have the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the very specific set of regulations that we have around advancing new nuclear reactors. The trouble is today we really haven't empowered the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission to bring this new generation of nuclear technology online. You know, they've got a pure safety mandate. And we absolutely have to make sure that these things are very, very safe. But most of our regulators have dual mandates. Most of our regulators are asked to both keep something safe and to enable the industry. So that would be like the FAA or the Food and Drug Administration, right? They have a dual mandate to bring it forward. The NRC needs something more like that. They need to be empowered and enabled and get the staffing they need to really understand all of these advanced designs. that are going to come with them through the regulatory process. And then once we've got that sorted out, we also need to just fix our general environmental permitting and siting processes as well that apply to anything, because all of the tangles in those will also apply to new nuclear development in the United States. The one nice thing about nuclear is because you can site it anywhere, it doesn't take up nearly as much land as a lot of other things. It actually has fewer traditional environmental permitting issues than maybe wind and solar do, and it requires less transmission and all that. So from that perspective, it actually has a slightly easier road to go on some of the permitting challenges.
Yeah, so important. Real quickly, Rich, we only got about a minute left. I just want to ask about this. The other thing is, back in the Obama years, we transferred a lot of our nuclear uranium supply, at least the raw supply, to Russia. We would have to harvest up a little bit more uranium mining here. Is that starting to get underway as well?
Absolutely. We've got an enormous resource in uranium in the United States. Our neighbors to the north in Canada have literally the finest uranium reserve on the planet. So certainly in the hands of friends and in the hands domestically, we could do this. We could fuel this all ourselves. And of course, the other thing we should remember is we have an amazing resource in all of the spent fuel sitting around the country at the existing nuclear sites. People call this nuclear waste. It's really lightly used nuclear fuel. A lot of other countries like France have great records in recycling that and going continuously back into their reactors. We could probably use that fuel over and over again, maybe 10 more times, to get all of the useful energy out of it. And that's a huge resource that we have literally just, sitting around the country, thinking of as a waste product, when really it could be a future source of fuel.
That is fascinating, Rich. That's why we always bring you on. You open our eyes to all the possibilities waiting right on the horizon for us. On behalf of I want to thank also ClearPath for making this conversation possible tonight. You guys are doing some really remarkable work, and this conversation is a big part of that. So thanks for joining us, my friend.
Thanks so much for having me, and thanks so much for covering this really important issue.
Yeah, it is important. There's no doubt. All right, folks, don't go anywhere. We're going to take a quick commercial break. We're going to talk more about this right around these messages.